thought by thought, thought by thought, transforming the world. So thank you again. So let's, as a community of spiritual beings and mystics, let's join together for a time of meditation on truth. I invite you to find a comfortable meditative position. And in this time, we concentrate our attention fully on the reality of the divine presence that is in us, that expresses as us, and that expresses through us. We focus on our unity with the infinite and our unity with each other, our unity with the world. As we feel, physically feeling our oneness with all life. And we are aware that the reality of God, his infinite mind, expressing in us, through us, and as us, so that we perceive the universe as we perceive creation. We are God perceiving God's divine ideas through particular perspective. We perceive our bodies, we feel our bodies, and we feel divine life. God is all life, and that life is expressing in us, through us, and as us. God is all knowing. God is knowing the universe through us, each one a unique perspective, not separate from God, but God itself perceiving the universe in one way and in many ways. We open our hearts and our minds to receiving the truth of what we are and what the universe is, infinite mind and its infinite ideas manifesting in our and as our experience. We are knowing that the life in us is the perfect life of God. We focus on that perfection, that harmony, that strength, that vitality. The more we recognize the life in us as this divine life, the more energized we are, the more we feel the energy and harmony, the infinite spirit. Feel that life now flowing through you as perfection, as harmony, as strength and vitality. Feel the energy that is God in every part of you, from the crown of your head to the soles of your feet. Feel the warmth of divine energy in your hands and your fingertips, your toes, your legs, your arms, your whole body, that gentle, comforting, harmonizing warmth of divine life. We let it have its way in us, recognizing it as the reality, our being. The omniscience of spirit, of infinite mind, expresses in us as consciousness, as understanding, as wisdom, as light. We receive the divine light, So, right now, if you have choices to make in your life, or if you are seeking direction or understanding or inspiration, open to that now, knowing it is right there, right now within you, ready to enter your consciousness. Know that the light will shine in your consciousness the right way, the divine creative ideas, whatever it is you need to unfold is now unfolding, to come to fruition in divine order and perfect timing. So we receive without hurry, without anxiety. Receive life and light, knowing our oneness, knowing our interconnection, the whole universe with each other, with all. We are knowing the reality of divine love. We are feeling the reality of divine love right now. Divine love harmonizes, integrates, connects all things in perfection. So our attention now is fully focused on the reality, the presence, the isness, the oneness, divine life, light, and love. Take a few moments now in the silence. Simply allow this divine reality to unfold fully in our consciousness in silence. The divinity that we are, the love, light, and life that we are, radiates through our bodies, radiates all around us, radiates into our world with every thought, word, and deed. We accept this as the truth of our being. This acceptance of truth and this feeling of the radiance and light and love that we are also grateful. We are also filled with joy. And we accept all this and more as we move forward through this day. We accept it as the Christ consciousness, and so it is. Amen. I'd like to begin my discussion today with a couple of passages from the book of Genesis. The Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, took one of his ribs. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Finally, this passage, and they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. These are passages from a story written 3,000 years ago. At a literal level, they illustrate the anthropomorphic concept of God that people believed in 3,000 years ago, and that some still believe in today. In case you're not familiar with the phrase anthropomorphic concept, it just means thinking about God as if God were a human being, and which necessarily means thinking about God in very limited terms. story of Adam and Eve is clever, and certainly we can reflect on it and interpret it in various allegorical or metaphysical ways that can be useful. But at a literal level, it is really useless as a scientific or historical account. All the cosmological, archaeological, and biological evidence proves that this is just not the way human species evolved. The fact that some people still believe in the literal truth of the Garden of Eden story indicates, well, that our educational systems have some room for improvement. The anthropomorphic concept of God isn't merely outdated, it is troublesome. It causes people to think superstitiously instead of rationally. In other words, it makes people irrational. Worse than that, it causes people to have irrational feelings and to behave in irrational ways. Now, recognizing behavior as and thought as irrational is not a moral judgment. Irrationality is simply accepting ideas as true without any evidence or based on illogical inferences. Most of us, maybe all of us, occasionally have irrational trains of thoughts, irrational emotions, and reactions. So this is not a judgment. We all, in our human form, sometimes experience or think of things in irrational ways. And if we are wise, we recognize our own irrational responses and learn from them. Here's the thing: irrationality is actually a symptom of mental illnesses such as anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder, delusional disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and so on. This is part of our understanding of human psychology. One of the symptoms of these different kinds of mental illnesses is irrationality. And stubbornly choosing to think irrationally is like trying to mimic the symptoms of mental illness. Some preachers and religions actually insist upon irrational biblical literalism and upon basing moral and practical judgments on that literalism. That approach, in effect, spreads symptoms of mental illness. We are better off not reading the Bible at all than thinking of it as a literal scientific or historical truth. Bible study should include understanding of historical context and reflection on the words in the Bible as we would reflect on poetry or fiction. Learning about the origins of the Bible and reflecting on its content can bring us inspiration, self-knowledge, and even insight into the nature of divinity. But taking it as literal, inerrant truth is liable to make us irrational and fearful. Thinking rationally about God is what we attempt to do in metaphysical studies. If we are going to truly be metaphysicians and effective metaphysicians, we need to have some familiarity not only with unity teachings, but also with the great, larger philosophical, metaphysical tradition. Fortunately for you today, I'm not going to try to give an account of the great tradition, but I mention it as an important part of who we are and how we can grow in our consciousness. And yet, recognizing the complexities and the depth of metaphysical theory and teachings, the practical application of metaphysical truth in our lives is really quite simple. I'll get to that a bit later, but I pointed out as encouragement to those who are maybe just beginning their metaphysical studies, or to simply recognize that we don't have to understand everything about metaphysics in order to apply it practically and effectively in our lives. So the application is relatively simple. If you think about, for example, the science of electricity and all that might be involved in that, you don't need all of that understanding of all that in order to turn on a light switch, right? Yet understanding the theoretical underpinnings of the application is important and, as I say, a bit more challenging. William James once described philosophy as an unusually stubborn attempt to think clearly, an unusually stubborn attempt to think clearly. That's what philosophy is. That's what metaphysics is. Theoretical understanding of metaphysics is important for this practical application in life, in the same way that understanding of scientific theory is important for devising effective scientific experiments and developing effective technology. So that is why I tend to go on and on talking about metaphysical theory. It's not just an intellectual exercise, it helps us develop constructive applications and confidence in what we are doing. We could say that this reflection on metaphysical theory helps us to grow in an understanding faith. Now, my last two lectures, I get that word from Eric Butterworth. He used to call his lessons in New York City as lectures. And when I was there, people still called them lectures. Well, my last two lectures, anyway, I believe I made clear why I conclude that God is infinite mind. Now, this is not an original thought with me, obviously. Many philosophers in history have arrived at exactly the same conclusion. And not only philosophers, but also traditional and important theologians. Philosophers arrive at the conclusion of God as infinite mind through stubborn attempts to think clearly. Theologians arrive at the same conclusion by studying philosophy, but also reasoning about certain biblical passages in certain ways. So, just as one example of a very orthodox theologian who arrived at that conclusion, I mentioned St. Thomas Aquinas, who, if you know anything about Catholicism, or if you're a former Catholic, you realize that Thomas Aquinas is sort of the formulator of the final version of Catholic theology and philosophy. Well, this is what Aquinas said, reflecting on the nature of divine knowledge. He wrote that God knows not only things actual, but also things possible to himself or to created things. And as these must be infinite, it must be held that he knows infinite things. I think it's important that Aquinas mentioned possibilities. I'll come back to that in a little bit. To cite another example, this one from philosophy, from the philosopher Leibniz, who was, as it happens, a Lutheran, not a particularly Orthodox Lutheran, but a Lutheran, and one who hoped to find ways to reconcile Catholics and Protestants in an era in which there was great conflict. But in any case, this is what Leibniz concluded in his philosophy, or some of the ideas that he expressed. He wrote that the supreme substance must be incapable of limitation, whence it follows that God is absolutely perfect. Perfection being understood as that magnitude of positive reality when the limitations or the bonds of those things are removed. Where there are no limits, that is to say, in God, perfection is absolutely infinite. And then Leibniz went on to reason that knowledge in God is absolutely infinite and perfect. So again, we see this idea of infinity and perfection of mind in these thoughts. Now, Leibniz arrived at his conclusions purely through logic, whereas Aquinas derived some of his thought, or at least seemed to be reflecting on biblical passages in his theology. And I'll mention one other metaphysician with whom you are all familiar. It's Charles Fillmore. Charles Fillmore wrote that God is not a person. God is spirit, infinite mind. He also wrote that God is your higher self and is in constant waiting upon you. So Charles Fillmore concluded from this idea of infinite mind that God is actually our true self, or our higher self, and that higher self is, as he says, waiting upon you, is serving and supporting you at all times. Now, the difference between the metaphysical understanding of God and the Orthodox theology, or much Orthodox theology, is that metaphysics works out the logical implications of that understanding of God as infinite mind. That's how Charles Fillmore arrived at the thought that God is your higher self in constant waiting upon you. Orthodox theology tends to put God off aside as infinite mind, not recognizing that the implication of God being infinite mind is that God is all mind, which includes mind in us. And so, based on the conclusion that God is infinite mind, we can experience the world in a new way, in a better way. Since God is infinite mind, God is omniscience, as we say, knowing everything. And knowing everything must include knowing all individual experiences. Your experiences, my experiences are God knowing something, knowing in this case our particular experiences, experiencing, one might say, with us, or experiencing, probably truer to say, experiencing as us. God is experiencing life as you, as me, as all of us. Now, if we try to think about omniscience or infinity in a linear and logical way, with syllogisms and so on. If that's the only way we try to think about it, it's really like trying to count to infinity. We will never come to an endpoint. We're likely to travel in mental circles or spirals. So I think a better option is to think about infinite mind and the universe with a kind of holistic logic. In other words, with the use of analogies to help us comprehend this notion of God as infinite mind and what that has to do with us. So I like the one analogy, and there's maybe an infinite number of possible analogies, but one analogy I like is simply the analogy of a book. What a book is. Let's say we're talking about the Bible. Okay, so the Bible contains stories, poems, prophecies, wisdom sayings, and all of them are in the book, the Bible, that you might have in front of you. But if you think about it, it's written in code. The code consists of letters, black symbols on a white space. If we do not know how to read the code, we have no idea what's in the book beyond just a bunch of squiggly images. But if we do know how to read, we experience the book in a different way. As we read the book, we have responses and interpretations. We might vaguely visualize the stories, so we have images. We might have feelings about what we are reading. We might reflect upon and interpret what we're reading and get insight. We might empathize or identify with the characters that we read about. Have you ever done that? Read about a biblical character and thought, oh, that's kind of like me in this particular situation, right? Now, when you think about all these kind of responses we have, the even really when we read, hearing as if in our inside of our minds, as if we are sort of the narrators of what's going on. We have all these responses, and yet, what is it that we're responding to? Black squiggly symbols on a white page. We're sort of decoding the book. So we don't just experience the words, we experience imagery and feelings and thoughts. We may even experience ourselves in the stories. Now, the book as an object is like the universe within infinite mind. Infinite mind contains the whole book of the universe, if you will, all the information in it, not only the actual, but also the possible. It already knows all at once everything that's in there. Its infinite mind is without limits and eternal. Another way of looking at it is it comprehends the mathematical code from which the universe is generated. I talked about mathematics previously, so I think you know what I'm talking about, right? So at the basis of everything is mathematical code, and infinite mind comprehends all of that and everything that the universe is generated from. And yet, this information, like as with the information in the book, and a book can be experienced in a sequence, a bit at a time. And this sequential linear experience of reading the code of the universe is a different kind of experience from the experience of already knowing the entire content, right? So as you think of infinite mind, it's as if you had the whole Bible memorized and assimilated into your consciousness. You can also read it word by word sequentially. So infinite mind, knowing the whole story, knowing all the possibilities of the book of the universe can also experience that code and everything that's in there in sequence, one event at a time, from one perspective at a time, through us. In other words, individually, we are the infinite mind experiencing the universe through unique perspectives. I'd like you to take that in for a moment. Right now, you are God experiencing the whole universe through a unique perspective. Now, where the analogy of the book is not entirely sufficient is that the infinite ideas of infinite mind could not be contained between two covers, as in a book. So there's a limit on that. And pretty much any analogy is going to be imperfect. It can tell us something, but not everything. Because the story of the universe is limitless, and the plot and the ending are not fully determined. Because at each unique point or perspective, from each perspective, infinite mind makes free choices in different situations. The possibilities for choice are known at the level of the infinite, but the actual choices are undetermined, and so the consequences of those choices are also undetermined. It's as if we are reading the book, yet at the same time making choices about how the book will go, how the plot will unfold, what will happen to the central character. You see, every choice that we make generates a possible world of experiences. A possible world of experiences. It generates it, it actualizes it. For example, after this service, you will choose to do something. Now, you have many, many choices. And once you choose a possibility, you generate a possible world. You actualize a possible world. At the same time, you also choose not to experience other possible worlds. You make a choice and you set the other possibilities aside, right? And if you'd chosen one of those other possibilities, you would generate another possible world. So infinite mind knows all the possible worlds. And at the level of individual experience, it experiences one possible world at a time. So, in every moment, as we choose from among the various options for our lives, we are generating a possible world and not entering into another possible world. And this perspective, I guess you could say, on the nature of the universe is really what has caused some physicists, for example, to believe in what they call a multiverse, where all possible worlds sort of branch off from choices taken and choices not taken. But we don't have to go there. Now, one part of our experience is the body. Your experience, though, in this body is not all you are. That's a mistake people sometimes make. They identify the body as the self. But your body is not yourself. Your body is an idea that is evolving in your mind. Your mind is this, we might say, a field within which ideas and experiences evolve. You might say your mind is sort of like the pages on which things are written. Your mind field is an emanation of the infinite, of the one infinite mind through an individual perspective. So you are God constantly generating or actualizing possible worlds through a unique perspective. Your body is part of the field, part of that generation, but it's not ultimately what you are. Your true self is one with the infinite one. It is, let me say, a witness, evolving experiences in the mind. This is one of the things that is taught in Indian metaphysics, if you will, metaphysics of Hinduism, that the self is the observer, Purusha. It's observing what's happening, right, rather than being what's happening. It's a witness of this unfoldment of possible worlds in divine mind through us. Everything is experienced as ideas in our minds, even what we call physical. It's really experienced as ideas in our mind. course, everything is organized and harmonized by divine law. So no matter what choices are made or what happens, there's a harmonization of the universe constantly at work by divine law, some of which we call what we call physical laws or divine laws, but there are other divine laws as well. Another way to put this is just that experience is subjective. It all occurs in the context of our minds, of our consciousness. We cannot step outside of our consciousness to directly experience an objective reality. And even if we could step outside of our minds to experience, to see, perceive an objective world, that experience itself would simply still be another experience of consciousness. It would be subjective. That's what I mean by subjective. Consequently, scientific observations and experiments and results are all subjectively experienced by scientists. They might think they're experiencing an objective world, but they're experiencing it in their consciousness. So again, it's subjective. So the truth of science is not really technically objective. If by objective we mean an experience of a material world external to our minds. Rather, the truth of science can be seen as subjective agreement. It's intersubjective rather than objective. When every scientist gets the same results from experiments or from working out equations, those results are regarded as scientific truths. The scientific method cannot arrive at an absolute objective truth, but it can arrive at a pragmatic truth. That is, knowledge that works for describing, explaining, and predicting these intersubjective experiences. So if one scientist does an experiment, gets certain results, another scientist does the same experiments, gets the same results, there's an intersubjective agreement. In their consciousness, they both experience the same thing. And if that continues to happen, we say, well, we've arrived at scientific truth. You know that even medical science implicitly acknowledges laws of mind because medical research into possible cures involves placebo groups. You all know about that. The medical research continuously demonstrates that people are cured just by believing that they are receiving a treatment. In fact, in some research, the placebo effect, that is, the effect of belief, has been more effective than the medical treatment being studied. And medical science recognizing this is basically saying anything that we study, anything that we research, there's going to be some people who are just cured by believing that they're receiving a treatment. And as metaphysicians, understanding that the universe is mind, this is exactly what we would expect. That some people would simply be able to believe they're receiving a treatment and consequently experience a cure of their symptoms. That is what we would expect, understanding that the universe is mind. Now, I've mentioned all this about science because I want to make a point about mysticism. Because the truths of mysticism are, as in science, intersubjective. When a mystic uses particular meditative practices, and those practices result in a deep subjective experience called mystical union or nirvana, and that experience is described as agreeing with other mystics' experiences, that experience, that understanding of reality can be regarded as an intersubjective truth. When you think about it, there's no difference between two scientists having the same experience of the external world and consciousness, as there's no difference between that and two mystics having the same experience, only inward. It's intersubjective agreement. So the agreement of mystics, in other words, on their truth is of exactly the same kind, or nearly the same kind, I should say, as the agreement of scientific experiments. The only difference, we could say, is that scientists do their experiments on physical ideas, while mystics do their experiments with spiritual ideas. if they're getting the same results, how can we say that the mystical experience is any different in kind or in validity than the intersubjective experience of scientists? Mystics of every time and tradition testify that ultimate reality is infinite bliss. That part of this experience of union with the divine is an experience of a transcendent bliss. And so, what that means from an idealist perspective is that infinite bliss is synonymous with or an attribute of reality. Now, I mentioned this idea, and I think it's important in a lot of different ways, but one of the things is that, again, going back to the sort of notion of biblical literalism, part of biblical literalism is a concept of hell. And hell is a place devoid of bliss. The concept of it is there's no bliss, right? There's just torment. Well, if ultimate reality is infinite bliss, and the concept of hell is devoid of bliss, then hell cannot be a reality. It cannot be a reality. Another way to think about this is to recognize that our experiences are part of infinite mind's experience. It would be supremely irrational, insane, really, for infinite mind to create a place of eternal torment for its own experience, right? If we are part of the divine experience, if we're part of the all-knowing mind, it would be insane for the all-knowing mind to create a place to forever torment itself. And one of the things we know about infinite mind just from the study of physical laws is that, and of mathematics, is infinite mind is supremely rational. It fundamentally consists of all logically necessary truths. So the irrationality, the insanity of a perfect of a perfect mind, of an absolute mind creating a place to torment itself is just, it doesn't make any sense, especially understanding that this infinite mind, as experienced by mystics, is infinite bliss. So hell can only be an illusionary, irrational fiction in the imagination of irrational and vengeful individual minds. Just as the story of Adam and Eve is a kind of fiction created to talk about creation, the descriptions in biblical literature of hell are not reflections of reality, but irrational fictions created by imagination. And we should recognize that even those irrational minds that accept this concept of hell don't usually imagine it as a place for themselves to occupy, right? They think of it as a place where the people they don't like go, right? So I think when we think about God and reality in rational ways rather than in irrational ways, there isn't any reason at all to accept any sort of concept such as hell, among other things. So now I come to the supremely, extremely simple, practical application of metaphysics. All this metaphysical theory boils down to uh, a few basic principles, but we can even boil it down to one basic principle as far as application goes. The implication of all this theory is that what you voluntarily put your attention on, you magnify in your experience. The ideas that you focus on are magnified and you experience them. Now, you are free to focus your attention on any ideas and any experiences you like. You can also focus on ideas and experiences that you don't like, but why would you do that? Once you know, that's what your choice is. So, right now, if you are focused on this Zoom meeting, as I hope you are, that is what is magnified in your experience in this moment. And if you direct your attention somewhere else, to a memory, to your surroundings, some other idea, then that becomes your experience. That's what's magnified in your consciousness. So, what you focus on, you experience. When we focus on suffering or lack, we magnify that in our experience. And that's a choice. When we focus on harmony and abundance, we magnify that in our experience. That's another choice. So the application is actually ridiculously simple. Anybody can understand and do it, even if they don't know anything about metaphysics, if they just simply choose to do it. We can always withdraw our attention from suffering and lack and redirect our focus and thereby change our experience, redirect our focus to ideas of health and abundance and happiness. We can always withdraw our attention, stop magnifying something that we don't want, and refocus our attention to magnify that which we choose to experience. And when we think about it, any human accomplishment, major or minor, is really an effect of focusing attention on particular kinds of ideas. So inventors focus on inventing, musicians focus on music, and so on, right? Technology, people who are into technology focus on that. By focusing their attention on those things, they generate certain kinds of realities. And we are always all doing this, even if we do it in a somewhat unconscious way. The more you focus on what you want to do or experience, the greater is the possibility that you will, in fact, experience it. So, right now in your life, if there is something that you want to experience more of, the simple metaphysical application is, well, then focus on ideas related to whatever it is that you want to experience more of. Or if you have a project that you want to complete, you won't complete it by withdrawing your attention from it, will you? You will only complete it by focusing your attention on that project. It might take a while, depending on how complicated it is, but ultimately the probabilities are that if you continue to focus on a particular idea or project or accomplishment, that is what you will experience it. And so it's extremely simple. The metaphysical cure, if you will, for anything is simply, again, withdrawing your attention from the problem and focusing on the attributes of infinite mind, focusing on reality or truth as understood in metaphysics. That's what Emmett Fox called, you'll all remember, the golden key. The metaphysical cure for illness is to withdraw your attention from thoughts of illness and focus on God as the presence of harmony and infinite life and strength and vitality and so on. The metaphysical cure for lack is to withdraw your attention from thoughts of lack and focus on God as infinite, omnipresent substance, all supply. The more we focus on what we don't have, the more we experience that we don't have it, right? And so we withdraw from that and redirect our attention and our focus, our mental focus, to ideas of abundance. And those of you that have tried this know that this is true. When we put our attention on abundance, when we put our attention on the limitless supply that's available to us, we begin to attract greater supply, greater wealth, sometimes in very unexpected ways. Have any of you ever had that sort of experience where just it seems like out of the blue, you got some kind of blessing of abundance? I've experienced that many times. I don't always remember to focus on abundance, but I know that this works, that when I do. Metaphysical cure for unhappiness really is to withdraw your attention from thoughts that make you unhappy. Now, this can be one of the most challenging things we have to do, but when we recognize that once we begin to focus on something else, we're actually withdrawing our attention, then it becomes somewhat simpler. Then we can focus on, when we find that we're thinking thoughts that make us unhappy, we can withdraw our attention from that and remember that where we focus, there our experience goes, and then focus on, for example, the idea of God as infinite bliss. God is infinite bliss available to us within us, then we can find that bliss simply by focusing on it. That's the basic metaphysical cure. Focus on divine joy. You can find passages again in the Bible that talk about joy. The joy of the Lord is my strength. This idea of God as joy or God as bliss, as we find more often in Eastern texts. So this is what the metaphysician knows. Metaphysician knows that where my attention flows, there my experience goes. Where my attention flows, there my experience goes. If we could just remember that little simple rhyme, We have a solution to anything that we want to solve. So I, as a metaphysician, I choose to focus my attention on divine light, life, and love. I like those three L words as descriptions of God. Light, life, and love. In other words, this infinite intelligence, this infinite healing life, and this harmonizing, connecting love. I choose to focus my attention on divine light, life, and love. I choose to focus my attention on on divine ideas of health, wealth, and bliss. And as I do that, I recognize that what must happen, according to divine law, according to the nature of the universe, what must happen as I focus on light, life, and love, that is what I experience. That is where my experience goes. So I invite you to make that choice. Whatever else you do after the service, whatever possible world you choose to generate next, put it in that direction of divine light, life, and love, of health, wealth, and bliss. And if, as you do that, so it will be, let it be so. Amen. Thank you.